The liberal indoctrination of our children is becoming more apparent day by day. We all thought that it began with colleges, that everything was only there. It was maybe just the students that were taking these liberal arts degrees that were hearing about these crazy radical left-wing ideas. But now it has trickled down into high school, to middle school, and elementary school, and even earlier in many cases, that these woke ideologies are now a part of not only just a high-level education system, but also just a part of the low-level public school system. At its core, these things are teaching lies to our children and setting them up for failure, setting them up to believe a lie that is being perpetrated by the Democrat Party. Parents are beginning to wake up to this, and I'm going to be covering a few key stories outlining this. I'm William Hall, and this is The William Hall Show. All right, welcome back to the show. So to go ahead and start things off, you have this black mother that is speaking out against CRT, or critical race theory.
My name is Keisha King. I'm a mom of two, one who's in the Duval County Public School System and one in private school thanks to school choice. I'm also a member of Moms for Liberty, representing thousands of parents. Just coming off of May 31st, marking the 100 years of the Tulsa riots, it is sad that we are even contemplating something like critical race theory, where children will be separated by their skin color and deemed permanently oppressors or oppressed in 2021. That is not teaching the truth, unless you believe that whites are better than blacks. I have personally heard teachers teaching CRT, and we have had an assembly shut down because Duval County Public School System consultant thought it would be a great idea to separate students by race. This is unacceptable. CRT is not racial sensitivity or simply teaching unfavorable American history or teaching Jim Crow history. CRT is deeper and more dangerous than that. CRT, in its outworking today, is a teaching that there is a hierarchy in society where white, male, heterosexual, able-bodied people are deemed the oppressor, and anyone else outside of that status is oppressed. That's why we see corporations like Coca-Cola asking their employees to be less white, which is ridiculous. I don't know about you, but telling my child or any child that they are in a permanent oppressed status in America because they are black is racist, and saying that white people are automatically above me, my children, or any child is racist as well. This is not something that we can stand for in our country. And don't take it from me, look at the writers of these types of publications. Our ancestors, white, black, and others, hung, bled, and died right alongside each other to push America towards that more perfect union. If this continues, we will look back and be responsible for the dismantling of the greatest country in the world by reverting to teaching hate and that race is a determining factor on where your destiny lies. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
So one of the key takeaways from what she's talking about here is where she says permanently oppressed or oppressors. In other words, the way that this system is set up is that it's teaching you that you're either one of these things. You're either an oppressor or you're an oppressed person, and you cannot change this no matter what you do. That doesn't work under CRT, because if they taught that you could easily change the direction of that, or even with much effort change the way that that worked, then they wouldn't be teaching it at all, because nobody would choose to be an oppressor or be oppressed. Those are both victim statuses. They're both these positions of one blaming the other, but at no point does it actually say that you can change any of that. It's already categorizing you into a specific group and saying that you must adhere to that lie. And the thing is that race is not a determining factor on where your destiny lies. I love how she talks about this and brings that up. In other words, you can change your situation at any given point in time. Whenever you choose to do that, that's the freedom that you have. You're not really truly oppressed. It's not a situation when back in slavery when you had to do this and do that and you had the slave master and everything, and it was almost impossible to do it. There are more opportunities afforded to you than ever before. The mere fact that we're even seeing them teach this in schools ought to tell people that where we're at right now. This is being taught in public schools, for goodness sakes, and yet for some reason they're still selling this lie to students in the first place. How can the system possibly be systemically racist when all we're seeing are things in the system that are systemically racist against white people? How does that work? But they're not going to explain that whatsoever. The thing is that changing circumstances has never been a core tenet or an idea in CRT. That's never been the goal of it at all. So she makes another statement here saying our ancestors, white, black, and others, held or were hung, bled, and died right alongside each other to push America towards that more perfect union. What she's talking about here is that it wasn't just black people that somehow managed to end segregation and end slavery. They didn't do it on their own. And I think this is something that people need to know. This is about teaching correct history versus teaching a straight up lie, because there's a big difference. Think about the civil issues of the past, really any of them. Whenever there was a group of people that was saying that, oh, they're being oppressed against or oppressed by this government or whatever it may be. So let's take, for example, just slavery or segregation. Was it just black people that got those laws passed? Of course it wasn't. If you look at who had to vote, I mean, just by the nature of ending slavery, it had to be white people that voted to end slavery. Think about that for a second. Even if it was with the persuasion of other black people, it doesn't really matter. The people that had to cast that vote, they had to be white for that to take place. Same thing with segregation. Also, take, for example, women's voting, for example. Like, there were men that had to choose to vote in favor of women and allowing them to and the right to vote. The point is that all of these situations need to be looked at and paid attention to if we're to actually understand how the system worked, how our history really took place. Anything outside of that is ignoring it. Anything outside of that is taking away from the real issue and then saying, oh, well, it's these other things that are to blame. It's clearly this other type of system that's in place, that it was only black people that made this happen. But that would be lying entirely. Because once you frame it that way, the truth comes out, and that truth makes you realize, hey, you know, it actually took everybody banding together to change this. It was never about this group versus that group versus this group, like they want to pass it off as today. But people forget that all the time. The other thing, too, is there's this other clip of this mother talking further about CRT and speaking about the difference between equity and equality.
We've heard a lot about how the equity educational policy is not equivalent to critical race theory. However, I've heard many things that are very disturbing that show it to be quite the opposite. First of all, the term equity, it sounds great, but it's exactly opposite of equal opportunity. Equity demands an equal outcome. That only happens when you gerrymander things to favor one group or another. It's not the same as equal opportunity. The second thing that concerns me is when I heard the definition of equity that has been shared here and through many communications from the district. It talks about groups of individuals. When you talk about groups, it is collectivism. It is separating children into groups. That is exactly what it is doing. And groups based on what? What we've heard from both hiring the Gemini group, which is also another thing that concerns me, is the groups are broken down into race, gender identity, sexual preference, and oppression. When we look at the Gemini group teaching, which I took time to watch the entire thing, it is even more disturbing. And this group was hired by this board. Because in that training, it talks about oppressors and oppressed. That is damaging to every group of children. First of all, some groups of children are thought of as being shamed for who they are. The others are taught that they are victims without the ability to further themselves and to look at the others as the enemies. We all know the Dr. King quote that has been shared, color of our skin versus the content of our character. He had a dream. This is a nightmare. It is a nightmare for our children, and it needs to end now. The training also, by the way, divides basically educators and parents, because in the training, it refers to parents as dissenters. We are not dissenters. We are the parents. It goes on to say and train educators to tell dissenters that this is simply the way we are going to educate your children. They are our children. We are the ones that have the moral authority over their education. We will not be marginalized. The board's job is to represent the stakeholders. When I looked at that screen up there, the stakeholders that were consulted before this policy was implemented does not list parents. Neither does the advisory committee. We are the stakeholders and we need to be included in this. Let me end by this. The job of the board is education. Right now, according to state proficiency tests, only 59% of Douglas County students are proficient in reading. Only 48% are proficient in math. That is the job of the school. The teaching of morality, teaching students to be kind, we can teach them to be kind. The rest of it belongs to the parents, not to social engineering in the schools. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Flores.
The thing with this one here to highlight is that they literally feel like they don't need to speak to the parents about this. They are trying to cover this up. That's the big nefarious kind of activity that you're seeing take place in this particular instance. Because what they're doing also is that they are replacing CRT and putting in this new weird system that they're calling some type of equity program. They're trying to hide it. They're trying to disguise it as something more palatable to parents. Oh, cool, yeah, equity, that sounds good, right? But how many parents actually aren't looking legitimately at what they're teaching? And notice how she brings up the fact that, hey, these kids aren't doing well in math, they aren't doing well in English, but for some reason, you feel the need to put this in here? I mean, I really feel like that's part of the big problem too, is that your schools are supposed to be there to help students be smarter, but in this situation, you're seeing them literally sacrifice that useful education, instead putting in these weird politic type situations in tandem with it. And that doesn't work. It doesn't work because that's kind of not what schools are really meant to do. Schools are there to educate. They're not there to try to push some type of politics. But really the problem with all this, the reason why they're getting away with it is because parents are basically letting them. I mean, ultimately what this boils down to is that you have an education system with parents that don't want anything to do with actually teaching morals whatsoever, so they push it off onto the schools, the public schools, to do this job, and the public schools are going to do this the way they see fit. They don't see this or these issues as being political. They see them as being their moral truths of the world. I mean, that's the reality of it, right? I mean, they will easily tell you that these are the moral standards. That's why they're not political, but they'll deny the truth that's in the Bible. For example, you can't say anything about that. Can't be a Christian in a public school system. You can't talk about Jesus Christ. You can't do that. But if you want to deal with any of these LGBT issues and whatnot, they have no problem with that. Because to them, it's not political. It is in a way, it's their own religion in many facets, but to them, they don't see it that way. So it makes it very difficult for people to really tackle these issues when it comes down to that. So here's this other mother that's speaking out about sex education to young children as well.
When she came to your school, when she procures bids for ISU with construction, and came to your school and spoke to your staff for 2 straight days, why did she do that? This is why she did that. This is why she did that. To make sure that when our students want to know whether or not they have a vagina or a penis, they have pictures from your staff to be able to help them. They don't have enough sex. They don't have enough anal sex. They need adults to tell them how to masturbate. And what I call that is... So here's what I'm asking you. You have a hard time hearing this from me, but this is for 10 years old and up, and this bill was passed for 5-year-olds. And you have a hard time me sitting here telling you the words anal sex, masturbation. That's hard for you, or the time's up? Because the time's not really up. I don't believe you, Mr. Wiley, that my time is up. But I'm going to end with this. I'll close with this, because this was too much for you. I can tell right now. And that's why you're cutting me off. But last time I said, you know what? Critical race theory. Little girl in the back was laughing every single time Megan said something, because white people oppress black people, right? Isn't your principal black? Isn't your mayor black? Now, I would like to introduce to you Ty Smith.
So this isn't the first time that I've seen things like this. If you've watched or listened to the show before, you've heard me talk, and I showed this video of where they basically were setting up this clip for first graders, I believe, and it was on sex education and masturbation. And the real question is, why are they teaching this? Why are they teaching this to children this young? Why is this a part of the curriculum at all? The reality is that it's basically inevitable, because ultimately, when you have these activists that are pushing down and trying to reach to these younger and younger children as time goes on and saying, you're in charge of your sex. You choose whether you're a boy or a girl or something in between or nothing at all. And you choose how you want to be seen and what your pronouns are and how you want to dress and everything else. And the parent's job is just to go along with it and affirm your behavior. The doctor's job is to affirm your behavior. Well, for them to push this on these younger children, they need to be able to tell them about all of these things. And that, that basically turns into them sexualizing children extremely early. Unrightfully, of course, but that's the way that they're going to have to do this, because ultimately that's where the things have led to. When you start talking about them being or changing their sex and all this at 3 years old, it's inevitable that you're going to have this stuff crop itself into these schools, because ultimately that's their goal. And when they teach this, they're going to teach those woke politics, by the way, alongside of it. And then that's going to cause these students to see an even bigger rise in the amount of numbers of trans kids and gay and this and that. You're going to see a significant big number change in that field as time goes on. It's already going up already. It's completely exploded. I mean, these issues didn't exist when I was in school. I'm sure they didn't exist when you were in school either. But now we're seeing them literally explode across these schools. In friend groups, you're seeing a lot of them correlate together. Friends turning other friends trans. I mean, it's happening all over the public school system right now. And I'm glad that parents are waking up to this, because it is taking place and somebody needs to speak out on it. So there's this other woman that's actually speaking about the school's curriculum and just talking about the idea that these teachers work for us.
My message to this district and the members of the Board of Ed: stop indoctrinating our children. Stop teaching our children to hate the police. Stop teaching our children that if they don't agree with the LGBT community, that they're homophobic. You have no idea each child's life. You don't know what their family lifestyle consists of. You don't know the makeup of their life. You have children like mine, who is Muslim, and I'm Christian, and everyone would think, they would never believe that of her, right? Because the way she looks, or according to Miss Cyrus, she's too pasty white. Why am I not allowed, when they purposely themselves expose themselves on social media, talking about calling for the death of a former president, or saying that any child that doesn't believe in Black Lives Matter should be canceled out? Is this what my tax dollars is paying for? You're teaching my children and other children that if they believe in God Almighty, they're part of a cult. Is that what scares you, to call out the names of these people? You work for me. I don't work for you. You have a duty. We are entrusting our children to you. We teach our children morals, values, when they grow up to commit crimes and end up in prison and kill a police officer. It's our fault? No, it's your fault. You're emotionally abusing our children and mentally abusing them. You're demoralizing them by teaching them communist values. This is still America, ma'am.
I especially love this clip because she's basically saying, look, you guys work for me. I don't work for you. Like, it's not my job to do or help you guys out in any real way. I'm here to basically tell you that this is what you should be doing. In other words, the parents are the bosses. And trust me, I get this. I understand, because if you look at this from a teacher's perspective, and I know for many years of different teachers, they'll say the worst part about the job is dealing with the parents. That's what they'll typically tell you. It's not the students, it's the parents. But, and I get it. There's oftentimes situations where parents are extremely annoying, but I think in these situations that we've covered so far, it is entirely justified for these parents to be saying, I'm concerned about this, because these things are objectively bad for students. It doesn't matter how you pin this. These teachers are not people that are America first. They're not people that are concerned about the actual truth of history. They're left-wing people that are churned out by colleges that are also left-wing, and they're pushing these things into these curriculums and expecting the parents to just deal with it. That's what's taking place. As I mentioned before, meanwhile, sacrificing actual education that the students should really know. So in a normal situation, I would understand when people are talking about parents being annoying and whatnot, but this really is a problem. This is something that has shifted massively from what it was when I was in school or many other people. This is not the same thing. This is teaching an absolute lie. And I would hope that parents do come out and say, hey, you can't teach my kids that 2 + 2 is 5 when it just isn't. It isn't that way anywhere around the world. You're not going to let you teach my children the wrong thing. And that's exactly what's happening here. But she's saying, we are entrusting our children to you. We teach our children morals and values. Now, the thing is that I agree with what she's saying in the end there about the parents should be teaching their children morals and values. The problem is that I think that parents have entrusted these public education systems to the teachers for far too long. I mean, parents got complacent. That's essentially why these things are taking place, is it not? Because you have a situation where the parents are saying, well, I don't want to parent these kids. I need them basically put into a daycare or something just to bypass the time while I go and do something else. And then they put those kids in the school. They could care less. They're letting the school parent their children and then getting upset at the fact that the school's parenting their children, right? Now, ultimately, regardless, the school shouldn't be doing that. But that's what parents have kind of done. That's why the school in these different school districts keep doing this, because they think they can get away with it. In many situations, they have been and they will. Because they're just saying, what's the big deal? You guys don't want to pay attention to what they're learning on a daily basis. You're not helping them with their homework. Who cares? We're going to teach them what we feel like is necessary to teach them. And boom, before you realize it, your kid's getting indoctrinated well before they even hit college. Well before they even get there. So she's absolutely correct to talk about this, to be bringing these things up. The fact is that we pay the tax dollars that are funding them. Ultimately, that's what it is. Whether your kid's in a public school or a private school, it doesn't matter. Your tax dollars are going towards them, and they need to be making sure that they're actually teaching just straight up education. It's not their job to be the moral authority in the child's life whatsoever. That's for parents to do, and parents need to step up. That's the real key here as well. The other thing, too, is that you have this teacher. This is in a 6th grade classroom, and she was handing out cupcakes, but only for certain students. So one of the students actually wound up getting upset at this and asking her, why is it that the straight kids don't get these cupcakes? And this is basically what happened.
But just because I support another thing doesn't mean I don't support straight people, too. Just because I'm Mexican doesn't mean I don't also support black people, or Irish people, or ignorant people.
Never said it was like that.
Okay.
Just said he did. No word.
Would you like a special unicorn cupcake for being straight jerk?
Yes.
All right, come here. Get a straight jerk cupcake for being a pill.
I'm just trying to be annoying.
You are annoying. You were very successful. Congratulations.
Thanks.
What a... All right.
What?
Like a dipstick, a butthead, a weasel. A weasel. Pain in my butt. This summer is
you said something else.
LGBTQ month, and I'm not gonna see you, so I want to give you something. Thank you. You're welcome. Everybody's welcome to a unicorn cupcake. I don't know. I just want to make sure there was enough for the people that wanted them.
So her response to all of this is to call the student an ignorant straight jerk. How in the world does this teacher still have a job? How have they not been fired for this behavior? And to top this all off, really what's happening here is that this teacher is taking this classroom and she's literally dividing them. She's causing a divisiveness within the classroom because she's telling students, if you're in this LGBTQ group, then you are allowed to have these cupcakes, this treat, this benefit. And if you're in this other section, then you don't get anything. And what does this do? What do you think this does and processes in the minds of these children, of these students, when they see this? And keep in mind, this can't be the only teacher in the United States that's doing things like this. Maybe giving special treatment to those that are of this woke group now in the LGBT space. This can't be the only teacher that's doing this. But let's take a second and look at that for a second, because when you take this group and you take them and you say, this group gets benefits, this one doesn't, what does that make these other groups that don't get those benefits do? They either grow to hate those other ones, or they say, hey, can't beat them? Join them. And that's the problem. This is why numbers right now are skyrocketing in schools, in just everywhere amongst young people. They are, by and large, joining and turning into these LGBT groups over and over again. They tend to do this when they're kind of a collective together. So if they're in a friend group of maybe 5 or 10 friends together and one of them goes trans, the rest tend to follow. It's only a matter of time. They tend to go right down that same path. Same with the classrooms. What they're seeing is, and they're seeing these people and they're saying, man, these guys can get away with anything. They can do whatever they want. They're getting cupcakes. They're getting special treatment. No one can tell them that they're doing something wrong. They're free from disciplinary action. They can do whatever they want, scotch-free. And a lot of students are looking at that and saying, I want that. Who in their right mind would want to be straight in a school where straight kids get the last, I guess, real bit? There are no benefits really at all. All they're getting is the raw end of the deal. That's what's happening. If you're straight, you're literally getting discriminated against at these schools. And they think this is perfectly fine. They think this is okay. Parents are waking up to this. They need to wake up to this. If they haven't yet, more will begin to. If there's one of the good things that's actually come out of the coronavirus, I think it's part of this. I think it's this, I guess, awakening of the public school system, because parents were forced to bring their kids home and look at this curriculum and say, wait, that doesn't sound right. That doesn't look okay to me. I don't agree with that. And say something needs to change. That's what's taking place here. And so you're seeing a shift, you're seeing an awakening taking place amongst parents, and I think it's an incredible thing that's happening. More parents need to be awake or aware of this. More parents need to speak out on this, and as a result, that's the only way that change is going to happen. But ultimately, the real big difference maker that we can really institute right now is to have parents be parents again. Instead of relying on the education system to somehow teach their kids all the moral values that they need to know, you need parents stepping in and directing and guiding them and actually putting in their head the stuff that they want them to believe, instead of letting some other left-wing person at a school tell them all this stuff and educate them on things when they're not ready, when they're not old enough, and showing all of this woke stuff going on. Public schools have done a horrible job, and it's clear and obvious by these stories that I've covered here, and it makes a very good case for homeschooling. It makes a very good case for private schools, anything to make sure that the parents are aware of the curriculum that the students are actually learning. That's the key here. That is ultimately the goal. So just a quick reminder that I do have a Patreon page where you can donate directly to the show. And also, if you are listening to this on Apple Podcasts, please remember to leave a review, as it does help the show out. So AOC, many of you remember I was talking about this story last week about her grandmother, and you had a few conservatives that were going to come out and support her grandmother that was apparently dealing with living in squalor and bad conditions, and it was all Trump's fault. That's what she was trying to pin this on. Honestly, she was saying, it's Trump's fault that my grandmother is living in these horribly bad conditions. So conservatives banded together. They put money into a GoFundMe to help her grandmother out. And come to find out, well, they didn't want that charity. And I talked about that because Democrats don't want your charity. They just want your tax dollars. But this is an interesting kind of development with this, because Daily Mail, I believe, actually went to the address that was listed for AOC's grandmother. And when they went there, I don't think they found her there, but they did find her aunt. They found AOC's aunt, and she told an entirely different story about what actually took place. So, remember, AOC was saying that her grandmother was living in these poor conditions, that it was Trump's fault that this was all taking place as it was. So the Daily Mail tracked her down, found the aunt, and the aunt said, quote, "I am her aunt. We don't speak for the community," the woman said. "We are private people. We don't talk about our family." And right off the bat, she's really kind of just saying, like, just as the nature of what this is, what AOC is doing is in a very stark contrast to what we believe in this area, where we don't share our business and air our dirty laundry everywhere. In other words, she's kind of saying, without saying it, that AOC was using this incident or whatever it is to gain attention, to do and use politics to push something that they don't approve of, because they don't feel like you should be airing your laundry, your dirty laundry out there, your business out there to the whole Twitter world. But she goes on to say, In this area, people need a lot of help. Many people have needed it for the past 4 years and haven't had anything, she said. It's a problem here in Puerto Rico with the administration and the distribution of help. It's not a problem with Washington. We had the assistance and it didn't get to the people. In other words, it's not Trump's fault. She never admitted or said that it was Trump's fault whatsoever, because it isn't Trump's fault and it never was his fault. It's AOC trying to pin it on him to make it seem as if he's the worst person ever. Anything they can do because they can't keep Trump out of their minds anyways. But anything they can do to get that to be pushed into the Twitter sphere, that's all they care about. But it was a lie the entire time. Because from the horse's mouth, it's not his fault. It's Puerto Rico that you have to blame for that. But once again, AOC doesn't care. She was using this as a political statement, which is what I said. She's a liar. She's somebody that's going to exaggerate the truth. It doesn't matter. You trying to pretend like the things that she says are real. Remember, this is the same lady that went down to the border, took all these pictures next to cages looking sad, and she was in an empty parking lot. I mean, everything that she's done is for the sake of shock and awe, but not because it's actually true. So I'm not surprised by any of this whatsoever. Michael Brown's father speaks out against BLM. So I'm sure most of you remember the whole Michael Brown situation, one of the black guys that was shot by a cop, and then they tried to pull the whole BLM card and all of that. Well, his father now is a kind of the second, I think, or maybe third person that I've talked about on the show that has now decided to say, hey, what's going on with BLM? Something doesn't add up. And of course it doesn't at all. So we already have had a report previously from Breonna Taylor's mother where she said BLM doesn't care about me. They don't even know who I am in the local chapter. They couldn't tell me or pick me out of a crowd at all, and yet they claim to care about Breonna Taylor so much. And now you have Michael Brown's father kind of echoing somewhat of the same ideas, but a little bit different. So once again, Michael Brown was fatally shot by police in 2014, and now they're trying to have a accountability and transparency, some type of they're basically demanding that from the Black Lives Matter, the actual main organization BLM, okay? Because there's these different chapters that are smaller, but they're actually trying to figure out what's going on with the big one, the big actual BLM, with the real BLM. So the Daily Mail put in here that Black Lives Matter is actually earned $90 million in 2020. $90 million. That's a ton of money. And then they were left with a balance sheet of $60 million by January 2021. Around $8 million was spent on expenses, including staff costs and other things, but the other $20 million was donated to local chapters and nonprofits. So the question is, where's the $60 million? Where did that go? Because there's no proof that this went to help out any of these cities. None of this money was put towards communities, to improving the communities, or to helping lift black people out of poverty. None of it. Because all the families that were involved, whether that was George Floyd or Breonna Taylor, whatever, I mean, they got a settlement from the city. So BLM didn't give them any money. Where did that money go? And that's really the question here. So if you remember the used to be co-founder of BLM, Patrice Cullors, she had actually stepped down from her position as well from the organization. And she had, if you remember, put in $3.5 million worth of homes. One of the big ones, $1.4 million, centered in this extremely secluded area in California with a 2% black population. Okay, seriously. All of that. And apparently she put up a $35,000 electric fence on the outside of it as well. Seems a bit odd. What you worried about? I don't know. Seems a bit strange for a community that's fairly quiet from what the neighbors were saying. A $35,000 fence. Once again, you have to wonder at some point, where did this money really go? Did it go towards her? That's what we're thinking, because Patrice Cullors funneled money into another corporation somehow. This corporate entity, kind of this blank corporate entity, which she then used to buy houses under that corporate entity, so they weren't in her name. And she did this to try and cover it up, so people weren't seeing her as buying it, but this government or this other corporate entity doing it. But what was funding money to that corporate company? Nobody knows. But it would have to be the BLM money. I mean, what else would it be? I mean, this lady's living a lavish lifestyle. She was eyeing houses in Miami that were around $5 million. I mean, clearly somebody made out big. She got out and said, I'm done. I mean, she resigned literally after the reports, wanted to say that it had nothing to do with the reports, but we all know it had to do with those reports. But this is just another person that's saying, why isn't this money going where it needs to go? What even happened to the money? Of course, he's not going to get an answer. And that's the thing. BLM lied to you. They lied to everybody. And the people like him, Michael Brown's father, that's trying to come out and act like they all of a sudden care. Come on. Like, get out of this organization, man. It's not going to help you attain anything. It never has. Just admit it. BLM lied to you. They lied to everybody. They took your money. They took donations. They profited off the backs of the outrage of these racial movements, and then they moved on. And it only helped to buy the co-founder a bunch of homes. So you tell me, like, where, once again, if BLM really cares about Black lives, show me where they spent $1 to help out anybody except themselves. I'd love to see it, but you're not going to see that, and you're not going to get an answer from them anyways. So to wrap things up for this show, there's this new report. There's this guy that reportedly committed suicide. I'll say it that way. I don't think that's really what happened. You tell me. But I don't think that's really what happened. But he was a person that broke a major story on the Clintons a few years back. So the police are now investigating it as a suicide. And it's this reporter, once again, who broke the Clinton tarmac story. So, once again, this was a bombshell story from 2016 that former President Bill Clinton secretly met with then Attorney General Loretta Lynch on a Phoenix tarmac in the run-up to the presidential election, while his wife, then candidate Hillary Clinton, was under federal criminal investigation. And this was due to the whole email scandal, if you remember that, taking place. So the police report is showing here that at 8:13 a.m. on Saturday, 911 received a call from a person down at a residence in Scott Trace, and then the Hoover police and fire arrived on site and found the 45-year-old Christopher Sign dead. Okay, now, like I said, police are investigating it as a suicide, which basically means that they didn't see any specific evidence on the outside of the person to show that they were beat or hurt physically in that way. So we don't know what it was. Maybe they took some kind of pills. We're going to have to wait and see until the full report comes out. Maybe something was put in their drink, or who knows what else it would have been. I have no idea how the Clintons operate, if you know what I mean. I don't know, okay? But something is extremely off when you look at this. So, once again, this was the 2016, during the 2016 presidential campaign. Bill Clinton met with Lynch on the tarmac of the Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport while the then AG was investigating the use of a private email server by Hillary Clinton, the former president's wife and the Democratic presidential candidate at that time. So this was a big deal because everybody needed to know about this. It was wrong. It just didn't smell right. If you're just paying attention to what's going on and the timing of everything, it didn't look right. That's why it was such a big story. But yet, what you're seeing here is all of a sudden this guy just randomly dies. Seems a bit strange. I mean, he did talk about his family, saying that before he died, obviously, he was talking about his family and saying that they were receiving death threats after he reported this bombshell story. So clearly, he was already kind of under the radar anyways. I mean, he said his family even had like secret words they would use so they knew what actions to take if he felt like there was a great threat against his family. But the reality here is that the Clinton body count continues to climb. It continues to go up at this point because what you're seeing is that everybody who either broke a big story, negative-wise, on the Clintons, or said something bad about them, or was associated with them on a deep level and knew about the stuff that they were up to, ends up dead. I mean, that's been happening for the longest period of time. When you look at Epstein and many others, it doesn't stop there. It's really odd that these people around them that had anything to do with them just die these mysterious deaths. It wasn't a medical thing. I mean, there had to be some type of clues around there to investigate this as a suicide. But like I said, we'll have to wait for the actual full report to come out about this. But the fact is that at this point, the Clintons have to have a higher body count than COVID-19. I mean, it has to be said at this point, right? I mean, this is getting absolutely ridiculous at this point. So be careful for anybody that's out there that's looking at breaking any stories on the Clintons or knows anything serious about the Clintons, because you might be the next one that dies of a suicide or whatever they want to call it next. But with that being said, that's all I have for you for this show. I thank you for watching or listening to the show. Please remember once again to leave a review on Apple Podcasts. But with that being said, I thank you for watching or listening, and I will see you on the next one.